My name is Connor. I'm the instructor who teaches the weekly boot camps. With our new sessions starting soon, we wanted to get a lot of people in to sort of see the kind of stuff that we do here and to maybe get involved and start participating in our activities, events, and workshops. So we're glad to have you all. Let's take a look at what we'll be doing today. So before we look at today's schedule, let's just glance at this upcoming free list of classes. This was just updated. So there's plenty of new things coming up. You can see that we have upcoming boot camps, which start on this Friday and Sunday. Friday the 28th at 6 p.m. we have week 1 of our TV pilot boot camp. It's open to everybody, and you'll learn the basics of writing a TV pilot from beginning to end. And of course, that lasts 6 weeks. That will take you from idea to finished draft. We have our new session of our feature boot camp starting up on the 30th. That's Sunday. That will be running on Sundays from 11 to 1, I think, and we might be adjusting that a little bit, but Sunday mornings is when that one will be. All these times are in Pacific Standard Time. Los Angeles is where we're based, so we're only using Los Angeles time here. We have lots of other little one-off events coming up, like a class on magic, like writing fantasy magic systems and things like this. That would be April 30th at 1 p.m. We have a big session on just how to revise and fix and rewrite a script, Thursday, May 4th. We have an upcoming sci-fi class, May 7th at 12 noon. Copyright for screenwriters, Sunday, May 7th at 5. We have a dialogue class, May 11th, and a scene fixing workshop, May 14th. And then finally, to cap off this new slate of free classes, we have Monsters and Villains. That will be Sunday, May 14th at 5 p.m. So plenty of new stuff to check out. Whether you are already a member or you're considering subscribing, we'd love to have you, because signing up for Script Camp gives you unlimited access to every single thing that we do here. Over 100 hours of class content every month. We are a screenwriting community focused on taking you from idea to draft. We are part of Skill Camp, which is a nonprofit organization that includes many other Discord servers too, but this is our first one and our biggest one. And we have many free classes, events, and workshops every single week. Some classes are for our supporting members, our subscribers too, which will include things like the boot camps, the Writer's Lab, and the Advanced Lab. Here's just a little bit about me. I won't go over everything, but I have been writing scripts for about 11, coming up on 12 years now. Moved to LA for the first time in 2015, got signed for the first time in 2017, have been signed multiple times since then. Have really recent scripts set up in town in the thriller, horror, action kind of space. I do a lot of rewrites for horror thrillers, and I teach the boot camps and weekly Writers Lab on Script Camp, and also the novel boot camp on WordCamp. So we mentioned these already, but feature boot camp is 8 weeks. You'll write a whole movie in 8 weeks. It's going to be Fridays at wait a minute, is this right, Nacho? I thought TV was on Fridays and features was Sundays. This may not be fully updated. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I think it was like maybe some changes, like the access changed in the middle, so some of the changes got lost, I think.
Okay, no problem. But yeah, go by our previous dates that we gave you. Yeah. So yeah, it'll be the 30th is feature class, and that will be on Sundays, and TV will be Fridays. All right, so you can become a supporting member to get access to all of our boot camps and labs. If you want to do more than just the free classes, and you'd like to actually go through 8 weeks to write a movie, 12 weeks to write a novel, 6 weeks to write a TV pilot, you should head to our website and sign up at scriptcamp.net. You can go to membership, and you can sign up here for your free trial. 2 weeks of free trial, absolutely unlimited access to every single class, event, and workshop that we do. You can also volunteer if you want to host events or teach a skill or language. Then we have a form here. We will link this slideshow in the chat so you guys can access this later. And last, you can refer your friends. If you are a member, you refer somebody, you will both get a free month of unlimited subscription plus a free month of Arc Studio Pro, which is a great screenwriting software. You can also just get a class on its own if you really don't want to subscribe. Go to scriptcamp.net/classes, and you can there just purchase a single course if you want to. But we recommend this monthly membership because you'll save a lot, and if you buy yearly, then you will save 40% off of that. Just $29 a month if you're buying the yearly option. If you plan to enroll but haven't signed up yet, we have a poll in the chat. You can vote in this. Once Nacho posts that, you'll see some blue numbers you can click on to indicate if you plan to sign up but haven't yet done so. If you click the number 1, you will get instant access to all of our member chat channels and exclusive areas of the Discord server. So that should be up in just a moment. Just check the chat for the classroom by, again, clicking that white word bubble that says open chat when you mouse over the classroom. All right, so we also have coverage, editing services, development sessions, consultations, and things like this if you check our website at scriptcamp.net/coverage. And note that as a member, you get between 50 and 90% off of a lot of these things. So we recommend that you subscribe. Okay, so brand new class today. We have plenty to do and plenty to go over and lots of interactive stuff to work on. So we are talking protagonists. Protagonist, antagonist, central relationship are the three characters we're mostly going to be talking about today, with that special emphasis on protagonist, because what we're doing, what we're talking about is writing features, which is a very, very protagonist-centered form of storytelling. Although a lot of movies do have many different characters, sometimes ensembles or anything like this, the whole Western model of Hollywood filmic storytelling is centered around the protagonist, and we understand that a movie is usually going to be a series of events that could have only happened one way in this one time to this one person who has been chosen and curated selectively to, or selected very carefully to be the correct person to be the one to go through that story. Because so often in high concept Hollywood screenwriting, we're starting with a situation, either because we're pitching on an IP or we're pitching on a producer's idea or something like that. So the situation is already basically there. And now our job becomes, how do we turn this into someone's journey? We answer this question, whose story is this? Which is always going to be something like one of the first questions that a development executive is going to ask you. Whose story is this, and what is their journey? How do they change? Because movies are the study of watching characters change pretty drastically. A TV show is going to be about gradual change that becomes drastic over time, whereas a movie is going to be about, just within these 2 hours, we're going to watch somebody maybe become the opposite of who they used to be. It doesn't always have to be the polar opposite of who they used to be. They might retain some elements of, some parts of who they once were, and that may be sort of an essential part of their synthesis as a character, is combining who they used to be with the things that they've learned over the course of this journey. But regardless of how much they change, they are almost always changing pretty significantly by the end. Not every single movie involves a character that changes, but almost every single one is going to be following a character that changes a lot. And because of that, we have to know who is the person that needs to go on the journey. Sometimes we know what the journey is, but we don't know the person to put in that journey yet. And today's class will be all about finding the right character to match with a story. So to that end, we're going to be doing a bunch of things. Like, first of all, we'll look at just some slides on how do characters work, what are these different definitions of protagonist, antagonist, and central relationship, which are the three most important sort of roles or archetypes within your movies, like little biosphere. And then we will move from there into looking at topics like challenge and irony, and how specifically do we interrogate a premise to find what is the character that will slot the best into that to create the best, most satisfying experience. We're going to have a little time. I'm not sure exactly how much of this we will do, just depending on how long some of these parts take. We have plenty to do, so I'm not sure if we actually will have time for this. But I wanted to just, perhaps check to see, is anyone struggling to find a protagonist for their premise or to find the right character for their story, and we can maybe give you some advice there. I'm not sure if it'll be like a full lab session, but I will at least assess once we get to that slide and see how much we have time to do there. But I'd rather, of course, get to the exercises, which are kind of the fun part of the majority of today's class, where we have two different ones. We have character from situation, where we're going to be doing we're going to get some volunteers to help us deduce who would be the character to go through some different situations, and then maybe tweaking the plot a little bit to approach it from the perspective of different genres, or just different kind of fun twists and challenges where we're going to find different characters for different variations on those stories. And then our next exercise is called Flip the Script, and we're going to look at movies that already exist, and we're going to ask, okay, maybe re-envision this as another kind of movie. Who would the protagonist now need to be? So that should be fun. We'll take, we'll use these pre-existing movies as a jumping off point. You can change anything you want about the basic setup, but we're going to be finding new characters and seeing how those tweaks that we'll be making to these stories are going to lead to totally new stories, which will be fun in all kinds of, different ways. So the chat has been, or the poll has been left in the chats. Thank you for posting that, Nacho. Nacho is our co-founder and teaches many classes and workshops on the server. Nacho has left this list of options that are related to the bootcamp in the chat, so you can click number 1, indicating you do plan to show up for the feature bootcamp. 2 is indicating you're interested in the Friday TV. And then, of course, you can just see the other options there, but the little blue emoji numbers will be how you will vote on that. So, and once you click that you're interested, you will, of course, get instant access to all of our member-exclusive chat areas of the site. Okay, we should just dive right into this, I think, but you can leave your questions and comments in the classroom chat as we proceed through today's class. And if you're watching on one of our other social media sites like Twitch or Facebook or YouTube, then we can still see your comments, though sometimes it takes an extra minute for it to show up. But we recommend you come join us on Discord, Script Camp. Just go to scriptcamp.net and you can get that link to join our Discord community with over 3,000 screenwriters. Okay, so I'm going to go kind of quickly through the lecture slides just on what is a protagonist, how do we find the right protagonist, and how do we define some of these basic terms, just because I'd like to spend more of the class on interacting and doing the fun stuff rather than doing the boring homework parts, but we will try to get to all the important information at least. So let's just start with what is a protagonist, or let's start with even simpler. What's a character? So characters are the fake people that live in stories. I think we all know this. And a protagonist is going to be the person that the story centers around, or it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a frog or a dishwasher or whatever the world of your story is, but they're the character that the story is sort of centered around, and we're going to be primarily watching that person struggle and change in that story. And in high-concept screenwriting, we might think that characters are sort of like tools that we use to explore a premise, because like I mentioned, so often you're going to be starting off with a premise that has been given to you, or you're pitching on a premise, and you need to then, your work becomes finding a compelling journey to slot into that premise to make it as interesting as possible. So if you think of how the high-concept screenwriting works nowadays, the producers will have the rights to Chutes and Ladders. And they're like, Chutes and Ladders is a board game with no characters. Someone help us figure out what this movie could possibly be. And then you'll have to come in and pitch them essentially a character journey in the world of Chutes and Ladders somehow. And that's like just the weird spot that feature writing is in right now, especially comedy writing. You're going to be pitching on IP based on board games, candies, like frozen foods, mascots, sometimes song lyrics, like the weirdest stuff that is considered valuable IP. You have to find a character to go through those journeys and actually make it a story worth watching. So it's more than just the Chutes and Ladders movie. It's this character's journey throughout this world of this board game. So we want to choose a protagonist that will experience the highest highs and the lowest lows that premise world sort of has to offer. We might think of something like Minority Report, right, which is a high-concept sci-fi thriller from Steven Spielberg from 2002, where our main character is a futuristic cop who starts in high standing in the world, and he ends up getting disgraced and having to prove his innocence against a crime he didn't commit, so he ends up going to the lowest lows of that world too. We see the highest highs and the lowest lows. We see him being a cop, being wealthy. We see him running from the cops, being poor, being forced to explore every aspect of that world personally. So that's kind of what we mean by a character that will be able to explore the highest highs and lowest lows. We want to choose a character that will be able to just interact with all the most interesting aspects of this world. If you write a pilot about a feature about a monster hunting company, and you have the protagonist be a secretary that works for the monster hunting company that doesn't actually get to go on any of the monster hunting, well, maybe there's some way you could find that interesting, but it sounds more like you've chosen a character that is not able to explore all of that premise, all of the world of that story. So maybe if it's a secretary who then wants to be a monster hunter and gets to go on the journeys with them and is like an apprentice to them, maybe that could kind of be a way to spin that. We're watching for a character that's going to go on a journey towards a tangible goal. Tangible goal being something external that we can tell that it has been accomplished. It's not something in their mind. They're not trying to come to terms with something or come to be okay with something or come to understand someone or something kind of esoteric and abstract. They're going for something that is very physical and tangible. And that might include we're trying to outwit someone. We're trying to defeat something. We're trying to survive a situation, something like that. So we're usually looking for, in our log lines, a kind of verb that suggests the main action that your main character is going to be doing. And we're going to be watching your main character going on that journey, and the whole story will hinge on their success in that journey. Whether they succeed or ultimately fail, we're going to be following all the important steps of that journey. And the question of what was this movie about is sort of the measure of how did this character change. However they changed is sort of the point of the story. So our main questions that we can sort of ask to determine how do we deduce the best protagonist? When we have some stuff, we have to do this kind of story math or algebra, right? We have X, now we need to figure out how to, or we have all the numbers, right? Now we have X and N or whatever. Now we need to fill in X and N in order to complete the equation. So how do we begin to do that? Well, we can deduce this character by asking some questions that we're going to ask when we get to our activities. Questions like, who would have the hardest journey in this situation? And I want you to lean away from this question of a character from this answer of a character who's bad at the job, right? Because that pretty much only works in comedy unless you have some great reason for it. I mean, like, occasionally it can work. Your character's just incompetent, but it's like a very easy answer. Well, a FBI agent needs to find a serial killer. Who would be an interesting character? Who'd have a hard journey? I don't know, a bad FBI agent, right? No, because unless it is a comedy, then a bad FBI agent wouldn't be able to overcome an opponent that is formidable enough to have a thriller written about them. Does that make sense? So it's like, if unless your character sort of stumbling through these situations and like accidentally succeeding is part of the hook and part of the fun of this journey, like we're doing like Inspector Cousteau, or we're doing what's his name, like Mr. Bean or something like that, where that's a big part of the whole fun is that we're watching them kind of fumble their way through a story, then picking somebody who's just intentionally incompetent will usually just lead to a situation where there's no way they'd be able to defeat a properly written villain in that situation. So an incompetent character is not always going to be the best choice for who's going to have the hardest journey here. You should look more at their personal connection to what's going on in the story and maybe say, we have to pick a guy to go and kill a shark. Okay, the guy has a phobia of water. If we pick a guy that's terrible at shark hunting, then that's like a kind of an easy way to that question, to answer that question of who would have a hard journey. So look for more like somebody who's going to have a hard journey in an interesting way, something that's going to force them to change in order to overcome that, in a way that's more than just I have to become competent. Though becoming competent can work as an arc in certain circumstances. That's kind of the whole martial arts genre is a lot of the time can be based on how do we become competent enough to take on the villain in the tournament or things like that. But obviously, it would have to be in a setup where your main character isn't just instantly going to be demolished by the villain because they aren't competent in the first place. So be careful with this one, especially in action-adventure. Usually in action-adventure, your main character needs to start the story competent in some way and perhaps end the story competent in a different way. So they have to either start competent or become competent over the course of the narrative. What else? Whose presence at the center of the story would create some kind of ironic juxtaposition to the situation? So could a character have to do the opposite of what we would normally expect them to? So if we're going to ask, let's do a story about a person rising through the ranks of a company all the way from the mailroom all the way to the top of the office, like how to succeed in business without even trying, which is a musical that's kind of about this idea. We might ask the question, who's going to just be the most ironic person to go through that? I don't know. How about the old CEO of the company, who he's going to be forced to go back to his roots in the mailroom and work his way up through the layers of success yet again, and except in a completely new, different world than he came up in. So it is ironic. There's a juxtaposition. It's not just some random clerk who's going to rise through the ranks of the company. It's the last person we would expect to have to do that. So that is often also going to be a good point of interest for how do we decide who is the character to go through this? Well, who's the last person we would expect to be able to or to be forced to undertake that journey? Ask this question. Who do we want to see succeed or want to see fail at this? If we have a character that we really want to see succeed, obviously you're usually going to be asking, who is the person who would be more desperate or obsessive about this topic? Because the more desperate somebody is, usually in some way, the more we want to see them succeed, unless it's something really evil that they're trying to do. So we can increase the stakes and the urgency. It might require you to tweak the plot a little bit to find that person who is going to be, so to put us in a place where we can find the person that is going to be the most desperate to accomplish this. You might have to change some other elements of the plot to do that. But this is why we start with log lines, and we work up to sketchbook, then we work up to story beats, then we work up to scene cards. Because by starting with the log line, you allow yourself to just arrange, the most interesting configuration, or the configuration of elements that will result in the most entertaining movie first. And then from there, you're going to be making choices. We're not going to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, then try to pick out from that what could possibly be an entertaining movie. Normally, when you're doing professional, high quality, high concept Hollywood screenwriting, you are starting with the most carefully tuned situation possible And then you are asking who would be just the right puzzle piece, or who's the right person that would act as that last puzzle piece to finish this whole package. Who is the person that's going to make this whole thing kind of click together? And then from there, you will have a solidly baked movie idea. Solidly baked? Solidly built movie idea. Freshly baked. No, not freshly baked. Well-baked movie idea. Well done. I've mixed my metaphors too much. All right, so last question. Can adding a central relationship, perhaps, be the thing to galvanize the story? And that's the difference between a guy has to escape from prison, is your movie. That just sounds kind of generic and down the middle. Versus a guy must escape from prison with the help of his estranged father, who is his cellmate. Okay, that sounds like a movie because it has a journey kind of built into it. The fact that we need to rely on these two characters working towards the same goal, despite the fact that they might have tension or difficulties between them, that actually makes that feel like a substantial movie that I can start to envision and see. Think of how maybe just adding another character can really make, especially a drama premise, really come to life and start working much more. If it feels like something's off, add a central relationship and try that and see if you can juice it up a little bit. So, I will maybe just pause for any questions just on the basics of how we kind of decode or use this story math to figure out who our protagonist is. You can use our general chat, or you can raise your hand and I can call you up on stage to ask on voice, just because I want to make sure to answer any questions on this, because this is a slide we're going to keep coming back to throughout the class, and we're going to be asking these questions to, find these great protagonists for these different situations. So you can feel free to request to talk or just type a question in the chat. If anyone would like to know more about any of these things before we move on, feel free to do so now. Or maybe there's none, and that's fine too. All right, so feel free, again, use that text chat throughout our class to leave your questions, and I'm glad to get to them. I will be scrolling back up through it at certain points to look for anything I've missed. I'm not going to do this whole slide right now, but you can browse the slides later and read more from this whole quote if you want, but this is just a suggestion on how to come up with characters based on an anecdote that Martin McDonagh, the Oscar-winning, Tony-winning powerhouse writer of the stage and screen, kind of explained doing for this movie in Bruges, where he had these two sort of facets of his personality that he turned into two separate characters. That is just a nice way of doing this. Sometimes it works with some stories really well. You take two things that you separately believe, even if they contradict each other, especially if they contradict each other, and you turn those into, you personify those points of view as characters and kind of build out from there. So, for instance, if we want to do a movie about religion, so to speak, and you have, maybe in your own heart you were raised religious, but you have doubts about it, or maybe you were raised having doubts, but now you're very strongly religious, maybe you can turn those two parts of yourself, the doubter and the devout person, into two characters in your story, and actually give them more authentic points of view, because they will be things that you genuinely believe, even if they do clash with each other. That's what leads to really good kind of philosophical conflict in stories. So that's just a little tip for how you might want to think of designing characters when you have a topic but you don't quite know what to do with it yet. Think of parts of yourself, parts of your personality, things that you think, versions of things that you think or believe, and how you can, render those as authentically as possible. All right, so let's look at cast of characters to discover or zero in on theme. Again, we're just going quickly through these just general guidelines because we want to get to these exercises, but let's look at how do we use characters to zero in on the theme. And this is drawing from a Vince Gilligan anecdote where he's talking about how he designed the cast of Breaking Bad, and he was looking at just the situation first. He did exactly what we're doing today. It's like a version of the exact same thing that we're talking about, which is think of a character to be the perfect person to fit into that scenario, and from there your themes will kind of organically blossom. You don't have to go into that story thinking you have you don't have to have a solid sense of exactly what you're trying to thematically convey. It could be that just by putting the right person into the right scenario, themes will, the story will just become about something. And then your job as a writer becomes, how do I zero in on that? And how do I sharpen that and cut away everything that does not directly contribute to that? So just sort of realize what the character wants and needs in the moment, let that character live, and tell his or her story, and the themes will follow, as Vince tells us. How do we connect with a character? So how do we make these choices? How do we know that we're choosing the right things? Well, we have just a couple guidelines here. Things like they feel real. especially feeling real in the context of the world. You might think that a character that feels too real might actually feel kind of out of place in something like, a parody movie like The Naked Gun, which I have up here, in which it's a very exaggerated, over-the-top, crazy cartoon world. It could be that your character might not, quote, feel right, or they might, not feeling real might just seem more like not feeling right for their world. It could be that you haven't set up their world properly, because a realistic character can feel wrong in a stylized world. So be thinking of how can we fit into the context and in the box that they are in, the genre that they exist in, the type of world that they live in. We want to look for characters that we can relate to, that remind us of ourselves in some way, even if they're totally foreign to us, or they approach going about the things that we would want in a way that we never would or never could. That's like a huge part of storytelling, is just the appeal of storytelling, is watching characters attempt to get things that we want, but we would never try to get in that way, or that we never could or would approach in that way. Maybe because we just don't have their same lived life experience, or maybe because it's way beyond the pale of, way more dangerous than anything we would ever do. It's way more morally bankrupt than anything we would normally do. It's way more difficult than anything we could normally pull off. All these things are just kind of at the heart of why we enjoy stories in the first place. Watching characters do stuff that we also relate to wanting, but in ways that we never could. They're approaching those things in ways that we never could or would. That's just kind of like a guideline for why do people watch movies. How do we sympathize or empathize with a character? Well, we feel sympathy for people in distress and for characters that are underdogs, right? We naturally want the heroes of a story to succeed the more difficult their journey is. And, the more difficult, the more badly we want them to achieve it, usually. I mean, we're still even going to, in some weird way, root for a character doing something that we know is bad, if they want it badly enough. Again, we can go back to this Breaking Bad thing. You can see how that character really drew audiences in and built so much sympathy in the first few seasons, that by the time that he was doing things that were just pure evil towards the end, then a lot of people never rooted for him less at all, because we were sort of suckered in by, like, oh no, he's doing stuff that I can relate to wanting, and it feels kind of good to do those bad things in a way. So you can see that, like, even if a character profoundly is different from you is still doing things that we would never do, or builds to a point where they are totally different from us, as long as we establish that interest in that kind of, like, rooting interest in their success, that will allow the audience to stay tuned into their journey and to continue caring about it, even if that character kind of starts to contradict what we thought about them, or even if we learn more about them, or they start doing worse and worse things. As long as we're rooting for them enough in the first act or so, then it takes a lot to make us to lose the audience and to make us stop rooting for them. We can do that. It's possible to stop rooting for them, but if you establish this rooting interest early, then it just ensures that you are on more solid footing. So we might think that character is like me, or I feel that character's pain in some way, because movies have this ability to make us feel what a character feels, and in so doing kind of encourage us to follow their story. So sometimes it will lead to tricky situations where you're writing a thriller and you're like, okay, the hero's trying to succeed because it's his life's work, and he's trying to succeed for money. And the villain is trying to do this for their kid. Wait a minute. People are going to start rooting for the villain over the hero, aren't they? And if the bloodshed just spirals from there, it's just going to feel more tragic than fun and exciting. So that's where that you can sometimes draw the line between a story that feels tragic or a story that feels like you can really stand up and cheer and really root for it is going to come down to, well, really, have you chosen the right protagonist and antagonist for that situation? Have you picked a person that we really want to sympathize and empathize with, and somebody that we really want to root to succeed? Or we can root for somebody to kind of fail. If we're using a villain protagonist story, something like, Nightcrawler, I think we're kind of rooting for him to succeed, but also kind of he's getting worse and worse, and we sort of want to see him fail. Or think of any of these kind of, like, really dark Martin Scorsese kind of crime dramas where the main character is a really bad person that just gets worse and worse, and at the end we're just rooting for them to get taken down because we're kind of rooting against them at that point, but in a way that is intentional, that the writer has wanted us to do. And still, you're not always going to lose everyone. There's still some people rooting for Jordan Belfort at the end of Wolf of Wall Street, because people are kind of like attracted to characters that just take what they want, because we kind of crave that a little bit in our lives. In any case, just pick a character that you feel like the audience will really root for or really root against. The point that you don't want to be is in the middle of those, where we're doing neither one, where we don't care if the character succeeds or fails, at which point your movie's dead in the water. Ultimately, we just want to find people fascinating that might be especially competent. That's a really common one. It's not the only thing that will draw us to a character, but somebody really good at whatever it is they do is just sort of inherently interesting to us in some ways. A character that's very scary or funny or clever, even a sort of evil commander in an army might command a certain social presence to them, like your Darth Vader type characters might be people that we can sort of root for in a way because they're just interesting to watch. So all these things are just various ways that we might find a character to slot into your movie. Now that we've gone over this question of looking at these questions of the situation, so who would have the hardest journey or most ironic journey? Who do we want to see succeed or fail? What's an interesting central relationship? We can kind of layer in these questions of, okay, who am I going to empathize with the most? Because that is who an audience is going to, we have to be thinking from the perspective of this kind of general, amorphous, invisible audience that has what we might imagine to be very general preferences. They're not going to have really crazy, out-of-the-box desires or, you show a baby to an average audience member, they're going to root for the baby. You'd have to be a total psycho to not root for a baby. You can just show a baby to some people and they will start crying. So it's you can see there's some things that you can just count on an audience rooting for. We have a question in the chat from Joke Machine Gun. Is connecting with a character the same as making a character intriguing? That's a good question. I think it's a character, if they sort of need to intrigue us a little bit. It's sort of like a chicken and the egg thing to me, where it's they have to intrigue us a little bit to connect with them, and we have to connect with them a little bit to be intrigued by them. So I think there's a little of both there. It's not the exact same because we might really connect with a boring character in some circumstances, but only if other characters are interesting in that world enough to kind of hold our attention, right? We might have a very sort of simple comic relief character that only shows up to do one thing, and we might really like that character, but not if they're the entire focus of that story. Generally, if a character is going to be the focus of the story, they have to be intriguing. But we can connect with other people in that world, especially in the world of TV, where it's we can have so many more characters. Then it does open up the options for people that you can connect to that maybe aren't as intriguing. But in a movie, your primary character should be both. We're mostly looking for both. We connect with them because they're intriguing, and think of that principle for all of your leads, your protagonist, antagonist, and central relationship. Thank you for the question. Okay, let's proceed. We are going to ask... do I want to do all these other slides? Let me do a couple more slides. I want to maybe just warn you guys that we're coming up on the activities in 10 to 15 minutes, and I want you to be thinking who thinks that they might want to volunteer. And if you want to volunteer, you will be called up on the stage and asked to do some kind of difficult story work. It's not going to be, it may not be the easiest thing, but so maybe if you're a brand new at this, you may not want to volunteer, but then again, it's just for fun and to learn. You're not going to get graded harshly or anything like that. So I would just think when you volunteer, you'll be coming up and sort of solving story problems in front of everybody. So just if that bothers you, then maybe don't volunteer, but we'd be glad to have people of any skill level. You don't have to be a subscriber or a boot camper to volunteer. Okay. So Joya says, I can't figure out who is more compelling. I can't unmute. We can't unmute because this is a stage channel, not a normal voice channel. I'm the only one who's speaking on stage at the moment. You say, I can't think of who I'd empathize with the most. Okay, so, and you'd like to volunteer. That's fine. All right. I can call on you when we get to the volunteer part. Thanks, Joya. And if we have enough time for the workshop your story to find the protagonist. At this point, I'm not sure that we will have enough time for that, but you can always come to Lab if you have questions about that. Lab is, for anyone who doesn't know, Saturdays from 4 to 6 Pacific. You can come with questions on anything you're working on or up to 5 pages of anything you've written for feedback. Okay, so just be thinking of if you want to volunteer or not. You don't have to tell us right now, but we will do that in probably 10-15 minutes. Okay, let's do a couple slides and give you guys some time to work up the courage to volunteer, and then we will go right into our activities. So let's start with likability. Is this important? This note, it often sounds stupid, and it comes off as stupid, but it does actually kind of indicate something. It's like a flag that we need to be paying attention to something, and usually it doesn't mean exactly what they say. It means they'll say, this made us not like the character, or something like that. I've seen executives just circle something that a character does and write, this makes me not like her. That is something that we can very intentionally interact with, right? Some characters are not meant to be, quote, liked. But the fact that somebody said this usually indicates not only did I not like them, I didn't like them in a it's something else wasn't there to make them compelling besides the fact that they were likable, if that makes sense. So if they're saying this, they're saying this because there's some kind of problem with the character. That might be because we haven't established their motivation well enough, or we haven't kind of shown why it is what they're doing at all. And we might also just need to look at if we want them to be unlikable, is something else making them particularly compelling? Looking at all these other earlier things that we talked about, are they particularly competent or scary or commanding, or like, do they have some charisma that draws us to them? All these things can make a character likable, because you have to realize that counterintuitively, we like unlikable characters a lot. We love them. Some of the most beloved characters are very hateable people. Is anyone watching Barry? Is Barry even a good guy at this point at all? Not even a little bit. Like, in the previous... I know he was always a murderer, but, like, I was sort of rooting for him in seasons 1 and 2, but by now he's essentially a monster. Is very delusional, and becomes, like, it's a complicated relationship that we have with Barry. So that's all done very specifically, with a lot of effect that is chosen, that those choices are made very deliberately. So you should also make those choices deliberately. Your character can be as detestable as you want. If they are fascinating in some way, your story should have at least one person to root for, even if it's the villain. Like look at sort of Tales from the Crypt, Creepshow style storytelling. I wrote on this show, so this is my favorite comic is Tales from the Crypt. And these stories really hinge on having a hateable main character that we're rooting for them to be taken down by a villain who will sort of punish them for what they've done wrong in some kind of messed up, ironic way. So, or like slasher movies or crime stories, think of all these times that we are rooting for them to fail. Well, they might still be likable even if they are a hateable person, because they're fascinating, and they'll still work fine in the movie if you tune everything right. Fleshing out characters, so we might just kind of ask some of these basic questions, like who do they seem like versus what they're really like. And I've used these examples in the past, like Michael Scott from The Office, who seems like this very cringy, borderline offensive, like kind of this boss that we all hate having because he makes bad jokes. He's always trying to be everyone's friend, but I think in the later seasons we come to really realize he's desperate to have everybody like him. So much so that, like, he used to want to be a birthday magician when he was younger, right? He didn't want to be a boss at all. All he wants to do is make people happy and make people like him. And the more that we kind of come to learn that and understand that, the more we sort of are endeared to Michael, despite the fact that he is really, we cringe at him all the time. He says borderline racist things sometimes. Like, all these things don't really matter because we have come to understand and empathize with where he's coming from. So ask this question, who are they behind closed doors, as opposed to how do they present publicly? And that might just add an interesting dimension to these characters. Ask also maybe, are they distinct? Like, take something from an archetypical version of a character. We have a guy in a Western whose paw gets shot, and now he's going to go find the killer and hunt him down and bring him to justice. Well, that's true grit, right? But what have we changed? By just altering one or two elements of that character, motivation, the nature of certain specific tropes, the gender, age, ability level, nationality, language, like any of these things, we can maybe find a whole new take on them, like Maddie Ross, who's a 14-year-old girl who her paw gets shot, and now she's going to have to go through that same journey of hunting down the guy that shot your paw, but it's a totally different story. She has a totally different relationship to everyone in it, a totally different level of authority within her group. Like, the fact that she is just younger and a girl radically changes how that story plays out. So ask yourself, how can I maybe just change one or two small things about them, and maybe find some new fresh approach to that character by doing that. And then last, you might just look at things like hair, props, makeup, costumes, mannerisms, defining characters by these really specific things that stick out in the mind. We have this guy, Colonel Vidal from Pan's Labyrinth, who always carries his stopwatch around, and that kind of ends up standing in for the character. Every time he starts a scene, he's a colonel, so he's always having meetings and briefings and stuff. He's always staring at the stopwatch until the last person arrives, then he slaps it shut, and that kind of stands in for his sense of punctuality and order. And we kind of, can think of the character as sort of represented by that stopwatch. So yeah, be thinking of all the stuff that is on them or with them and how we can maybe use that, how maybe those things can be important to them. We have that kid from Charlie Brown that's always carrying the blanket around, that kind of, stands in for that character. We have that one kid that's always playing his little piano, that kind of stands in for that character, right? And showcases some of their interests or their way of looking at the world or something like that. So ask yourselves, What do they have with and on them, and how can that inform how they showcase who they are? There's just some tips for designing interesting characters for you. We might also just remember this principle that characters are not people. This is something that sounds a little strange at first, but imagine if, for instance, your character gets arrested by the police and they're forced to empty out their pockets. Well, we ask, what's inside their pockets? Oh, and your answer, I don't know, nothing. Most people don't have stuff in their pockets. Well, this isn't a person. It's a character. It's a human that only exists for 2 hours in brief flashes. And there's not a lot of time to learn who somebody is in a movie, especially when we're only seeing them briefly. So use this every opportunity that you have to build out your character through small things. Their possessions. I mean, if we have a scene set in your character's room, there's no reason for you not to characterize that person by saying, what do they have on their walls? What do they have on their shelves? Like, any of these things that just kind of build out that sense of who they are, or like the way that they present themselves to the world. There are lots of little opportunities to do that in a script, and you have to kind of take everyone that you can, because we don't see characters for very long. So think, what are in your character's pockets? If they get arrested by the police and forced to turn them out, well, we're going to see all the stuff that they carry on them all the time, but that they don't necessarily want everyone else to see. That's a really big opportunity for us to learn something about them. Here's a question. A note that I got one time about my character was that something she was doing was unnecessary for the script, and a different person told me it was good characterization. Is there a balance that must be struck between the two? I guess it would depend on why they said that something your character was doing was unnecessary. Maybe because it did not lead to them pursuing their goal in the story, or it kind of felt like a distraction from the main crux of the narrative. That could be why. Or there's any number of reasons why they could have given you that note. But I would say that usually we should have everything that the character's doing tuned towards this specific meta goal of pursuing their objective, right? Their larger objective in the distance. And then, like, along the way, they will have sort of sub-objectives that will lead them there. I think this is going to be the most useful for you the most useful tool for you to think of is to think of, even if you're like, okay, I really want to have a scene where my character goes to McDonald's. I know it's an action-adventure movie, but I just have a hilarious idea of what they would do at McDonald's, and that just seems like I really want to have a scene that would work there. Well, you have to then think of that as a sub-objective. So it has to be something that is in some way going to push them, if not like in a direct plot way, maybe emotionally allow them to progress towards their final goal. So if it's like your character, it's an action story, we need to fight the terrorists, but I really want to have the McDonald's scene, well, maybe your character can be feeling really low in one scene, and you can really emphasize how they are feeling really low. They need a pick-me-up. They need to go to their favorite restaurant ever. And then we can understand that scene not as a digression, but as something that's going to help them internally solve the problem. So I think that's what you're going to want to do most of the time. Try to like combine those objectives into one thing, even if it's not going to seem like it's really relevant for the plot. At least make it feel relevant for that character in their development, and then it's going to not feel as much like unnecessary characterization. I hope that helps. Okay, let's proceed to any questions about what we've talked about so far. I think I'm going to pause on this question of who's having trouble finding a protagonist for their story, and we'll see how fast we get through some of these activities. I might come back to that if we have like plenty of time, but if not, then we will be. We're always open to do these things in lab, for instance, lab from 4 to 6 on Saturdays, or we have plenty of text channels that you can use for all of your screenwriting questions and comments throughout the week. Okay, let me pause and take questions on any of the character design principles that I've mentioned so far before we go into activities. Feel free to type or to use the hand raise icon. Looks like we have a few folks typing. I'll let you guys finish this. I want to make sure to iron out those last questions before we move into activities. All right, if there's no questions, then we will proceed. Looks like we do have somebody typing, but I will return to the chat soon and check for questions I've missed, so feel free to continue that question or comments. All right, so let's move to our first exercise. I'm going to start with a demonstration of how you can approach this. So I'm going to do this first one, then I will call for volunteers, so you don't have to tell us you're volunteering now. You can do that in just a moment. I'll let you know. But let me start with an example. Okay, so I'm going to do this first one. So exercise character from situation. So we're going to start with this thing, like I mentioned before, so much of what we do is starting with a situation, then finding the right character to go through that journey. So I'm going to just have a couple scenarios, and then I'm going to pick different protagonists for different genres, so different takes on the same idea. And we're going to ask this question: how does the hero change and why? How do these genre choices inform our protagonist design? And I haven't really prepped this, so I'm just going to kind of go off the top of my head. But I'll do my best. Let's take a look. I'm going to create a hero for this scenario. The CEO of a Google-type tech company is being stalked by his old business partner. Not really a totally solid logline yet, right? But we get the situation at least. We know who the two players are. We know the world they're in. We know the type of conflict that we're in. So now I'm going to take you through 3 different protagonists for 3 different genres of story here. So we're going to start with the default, which is just thriller. And in this case, I think most of the time when we start with these different genres, we have to identify what is the hook. So we have to start by asking, I've seen movies like this before. We've seen stalker thrillers before. But what is the hook of this particular approach or this particular version of events? Well, in this case, I don't think I've seen a stalker thriller before where the stalker is a millionaire. Maybe the Invisible Man would be kind of like this. I guess he's a millionaire, but he's not really using his wealth to stalk our main character. In that movie, he's using his invisibility suit. So in a way, he is. But you see what I mean, right? So your stalker is a millionaire. Well, that gives them access to tons more things that they can do. And I think that in this version, which is just the sort of straight thriller, we're going to want to pick a main character that has, wronged this stalker in some way. So his old business partner. We need to have, for a thriller, we need to have high stakes. So we want to have a villain that we have kind of created, ideally, in this situation, where our main character is maybe going to embody all of the worst parts of CEOs. So I'm going to use the paradigm I talked about of who are they behind closed doors versus who are they out in the open, and I'm going to say, this guy presents to the world. We're going to pick a main character that sort of seems like the perfect CEO in public. He seems like the head of Google. Remember their motto was "Don't be evil." So he's kind of the chill, cool tech bro, don't be evil guy. They give lots to charity. They have a lot of different, initiatives all over the world to help people, and he just seems like the coolest, chillest guy ever. But behind closed doors, he's actually the worst. He's Jeff Bezos behind closed doors, right? So that's going to be the main character I pick for this one, because in our default sort of thriller approach to this, we want to have a really high-stakes villain. So we want to have a villain that has a really strong personal vendetta against the main character. Let's say he was up for a big promotion, and our main character just fired him, no severance package, at the last minute, like Elon Musk style, fired this guy, because our main character is secretly a jerk. So that's who our main character is going to be in the thriller version of this. He presents as the perfect CEO, but behind closed doors embodies all the worst aspects of CEOs and is secretly, although their motto is "Don't be evil," he secretly is kind of evil, and thus this story will act as sort of a cautionary tale for what happens when you mess with the wrong person. I think a lot of stalker thrillers are kind of like that, but, it's not the most brilliant thematic approach ever, but at least that is who I would pick for the thriller approach to this. Now let's look at comedy, right? So this has to be funny. A nice question to ask might be, well, what is the lesson that a character has to learn in comedy? That's not always going to work, and sometimes the characters reject the lesson, like in Always Sunny in Philadelphia or stuff like that. But in this case, we're going to maybe ask this question: what lesson might our main character want to learn? So I'm going to say for this, our main character is too serious all the time. He never knows how to lighten up. So in this case, we're going to pick a very grim and very gruff, very laconic CEO who hates making jokes, right? And then maybe he fires the head of the gadget department. And now this guy is going to wage a prank war against him, like Big Fat Liar. And he's going to kind of ruin this guy's life with, drones that spray paint all over your walls. Or he's got he can use a bunch of lawn toys that go crazy and ruin the guy's lawn. Or he can get a bunch of remote-controlled cars and attack the guy while he's trying to make his way to work. He can make, any of their sort of little drone or controlled or like phone-controlled, app-controlled toys or games he can use in his sort of war of prank attrition to get revenge on our main character and ruin his life and ultimately teach him how to sort of take a joke. And he's going to learn how to, I guess, develop a sense of humor and fight back with pranks by the end. Maybe he even fired the guy at the beginning because the guy made a joke and in a meeting or something, and our main character was like, "No jokes allowed at my company. Get out." This sounds like a kind of like early 90s kind of comedy. This is like Home Alone kind of vibe to this one, isn't it? But it sort of works, right? Like comedy, we still see it's the same setup. CEO being stalked by his former employee, but now it's funny because the stakes are lower. So with thriller, I chose higher stakes, as high as possible. And this guy's, it's probably going to escalate to he's trying to kill the main character. And in the comedy version, we have lowered the stakes deliberately to make it not life and death, but still it's something amusing with a tangible goalpost. We need to out-prank the pranker, the master of pranks, which is going to be particularly difficult. Why? Well, because the antagonist is, again, a millionaire who has tons of gadgets. So I understand the hero, I understand the villain. It makes perfect sense. Prank war movie. Last, we have sci-fi. For this one, I'm going to think of some scientific premise that could only work in this situation and design the movie around that and pick a main character that I feel would be the one to explore that. So in this case, I'm going to start with the antagonist in the sci-fi version of this, and I'm going to say his old business partner was the head of designing their AI, right? And after he gets fired by our main character, the antagonist commits suicide or dies. And now our main character is sort of having to take over his wing of the company, and he realizes that this guy's artificial intelligence is based on his own mind. So it's sort of like our main character's old business partner is the one sort of running this wing of the company, right? And now he's going to trap him inside his wing of the corporation and exact his revenge from beyond the grave using his sort of digital footprint or his like digital afterlife as a computer program based on his personality. That's a little bit like we have an element of that in the Resident Evil movie, don't we? With the Red Queen, the little girl that was like the guy who designed that facility's daughter. Kind of like that, right? All right, so our main character in that case would probably be someone who I'm going to say he's trying to shut down the AI department. He's somebody who hates AI, and therefore that's why he fires the guy in the first place, and that's why he has the most to kind of gain from this premise. This is going to be the story of him sort of gaining an appreciation of what technology can do, and again, why you shouldn't mess with the wrong person, or in this case, the wrong computer. Okay, so those are just right off the top of my head, just kind of 3 takes on the story, and you can see why I said this is going to be kind of tricky. It's because you're not only picking a character, you have to make other changes and choices too. You have to pretty quickly be able to assess, okay, what would the hook of that version of the story be? And so I'm going to go over just those things that I mentioned here. Identifying the hook to make finding the protagonist easier. So what's a hook? It's sort of the answer to this question. Well, we've seen 100 movies like this before, but never one where blank. So in this case, we've seen a million stalker thrillers before, but we've never seen one where the villain is a millionaire. We have seen a lot of stalker thrillers before, but never one where it's a prank war. We have seen stalker thrillers, but never one where the digital ghost of your stalker is the one that's after you. So there's 3 hooks that I was able to then suss out or assess and thereby determine a protagonist who would kind of mesh really well with that hook. So this isn't exactly easy to do, and I had like a little, I have a small amount of time before the class to think about it, so it wasn't like directly off the top of my head. I didn't write anything down, but it's like, this isn't always going to be something that jumps out to you right away. So when we do these activities, I might take you to one of these question pages. We might ask just some of these questions like, well, we've never seen a movie like X before, but how about blank? Or we might ask, who has the hardest journey here? We might ask things like, who poses some kind of ironic juxtaposition to the situation. So don't panic if you can't think of anything. I'll have little quizzes and cheat sheets to help you guys out. But I hope that clarifies what these activities are sort of going to be like. All right, let me check for questions, and then we will move on to activities, and I'll call for volunteers. All right, so here are some questions from Not FBI. What about situations and settings where the character's pockets cannot be emptied? For instance, a spaceship where the crew wear similar attire. This is in reference to our theoretical situation where your character's pockets are getting emptied by the police. Well, if your character was in a spacesuit, they would not be getting frisked by the police, so it sort of breaks the premise of the question to begin with. But there's all kinds of things you can do to personalize, I don't know, a spacesuit in the same way that a character would personalize their clothes, right? Or if it's a uniform or something they can't change, do they wear the uniform well? Or do they have non-regulation boots? Do they have, is the knife that they use not the thing that was standard issue? Is it something they picked up in the field? Have they modified their gun in the field with parts scavenged from other people's guns? Like, even within the sort of uniform of a job, you can still personalize, you can still showcase your character's personality through small, unusual choices. Look for small, unusual choices. Good question, though. Joya says, it seems like mobsters or drug traffickers are somehow always family-oriented or motivated. Is that the only route to go for antagonists that are supposed to be the main character? No, but you can see why that's the easiest thing. It's because nobody in their right mind would root against a character that was doing something for their family, no matter what that thing is, right? After a certain threshold, we will say, okay, now you're just being evil. But there's almost no length that somebody wouldn't go to protect their, a lot of people would not go to protect their loved ones. And that just makes that a really relatable motivation for a character that's doing really morally challenging things. So you can see, like, if our mobster criminal character was motivated by, I just like money, it makes it hard to root for that character as the main focus of a story. So you can see, I guess, you don't have to make that choice, but you can see why it's there, and it's to just make it easier for the audience to connect to and continue to invest in that person's journey. And also, it's just, kind of realistic to an extent. Not that many people want to do crime and murder and mobster stuff just because they like money. Or if they do want money, it's because they want money to what? To give their family a better life, to get get somebody to get out of poverty, to stop struggling. Like, there's going to be a more relatable motivation underneath just the craving for money or power a lot of the time. Or if there's not, you should try to find one, unless you're deliberately trying to make that person super unsympathetic. So it's not an always you have to do it kind of thing, but that's why it's kind of there. All right, question, ironic juxtaposition, can we explain again? Sure. So this is going to be maybe a character that is the opposite of the person that we would expect to see doing this thing. If we have a character that needs to become a police officer, why not have them start as a criminal, right? It's kind of ironic that a criminal would have to become a police officer. Or if you have a character that needs to understand or appreciate the value of something, well, we make it somebody that we would never, ever expect to understand or appreciate the value of that thing. So we're going to be looking for situations where it's kind of the opposite of what would be expected or what would be normal. That's where we're going to find the best irony. All right, so let's move on to our... Thank you for the questions, everybody. Let's, and I hope that everybody gets these basics of how do we identify what is the hook, and you understand that we are choosing our main character in such a way as to click with that hook and make the whole story work. All right, let's move on to our first activity. We're going to start with a character from situation, the same as I just did, and then we have a couple other activities I mentioned after this, but we'll start with just this. I'll give you a situation. We'll start with the default. Who do you think the main character would be? And then we have different variations of genre. So you'll pitch, these are, again, different stories every time. You can tweak whatever plot elements you want, and you'll give us different suggestions. All right, let's start. Who'd like to volunteer first? Okay, let's see. So Joya came in first, so we'll start with Joya, and looks like Pollock has also volunteered. Pollock can maybe do the next one if he wants to. Come on onto the stage, Joya. You'll have to click the... There you are. Hi.
Hello, hello.
You ready to do this little activity with the... I don't know if you saw the prompt yet, but this involves a talking cat. So let's... you want to read it out for us? And we can do this one. Go ahead and read the scenario there.
Cat demands.
Oh, sorry, that's a typo. It's supposed to be develops.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Okay. The cat develops the ability to speak and shocks everyone by demanding the right to vote. She will stop at nothing until cats get their representation in government.
All right. Kind of a wacky premise, right? But our first question is going to be... animated. Our default is animated comedy, which is what this sort of already sounds like, right? It would be tough to imagine this as anything besides an animated comedy, so we'll start there. Now let's ask the question, who do you think would make a good hero for this? And you can talk it out. You don't have to have the right answer right away. Feel free to ask questions or just suggest stuff, or just you can play it kind of casual.
A cat that is going to be like the voice for all the other cats. Leader cat. It's going to be making a case for the whole cat world. That, we need to be in government. They're going to be kind of vocal, I guess. They'll be more type, or they'll be what do you call it, a extroverted personality or whatever.
Okay.
And it might be, they'll probably be really, it may be comical, but either way, they're going to be the forefront of all the other cats. They're gonna kind of be like maybe the bridge between humans and cats. Like, this is the one we need, or this whole idea falls apart.
Okay, so you're right that that sounds like where the movie would sort of go. But let's talk about just how do we pick our main character. So you're describing a cat that would be really good at this, an extroverted leader cat, right? But that's not the person who'd have the hardest journey here, or an ironic journey here, is it? So who would this be particularly difficult for?
Oh, wow.
They can still be a leader, they can still be extroverted, but think, who would be the least likely cat to represent all the other ones?
Oh, it would seem to me to be a cat that does not have any of those traits. Kind of like the Moses story. In the like he didn't want to be the leader, and whoever was like, you're going to be the one that's going to lead out of Egypt or whatever. I don't know if you've seen The Prince of Egypt.
A long time ago, but I know the story, yeah.
Yeah, so he didn't feel like he was supposed to be a leader, but whoever told him you're supposed to be the leader, like, he didn't have the leader personality. So I guess a cat that nobody would expect that, could step to the...
So where did Moses come from? Moses was found in a basket by poor people, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So how do we translate that to the cat world?
Underdog cat.
Okay.
Cat that's not. It really doesn't. Yeah, the underdog, kind of like on the streets.
Yes. Okay. A stray is what you're getting towards, right?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Great. So do you see how a mangy stray would actually have a really difficult time with this, but could still be a leader, could still have those extroverted traits? Because if we choose an incompetent character, then there's no way they'd be able to actually accomplish the goal of the movie. We're going to choose something to make it difficult for them besides the fact that they are incompetent. Something that would make people predisposed to dislike them, right? Like with Moses, he comes from the slaves, doesn't he? So that's why people look down on him. They're like, who are you to lead these people to freedom? It's the same sort of thing. You pick a mangy stray as the main character. Well, not only does it make sense that a mangy stray would have seen the worst of humanity and how they treat cats, right? It just makes sense that that would be the main character. And also, they could have all the personality traits you need to do this, and maybe they would even be chosen by Cat Jesus or something like that. That'd be kind of funny. Okay, so good choice. That would be exactly how I would see it go in the default version of this. Kind of an underdog cat that was not looked well upon by humans, right? It would have to be not Barack Obama's cat. It's going to be a cat that comes from nothing, because that's going to give us the greatest arc and the greatest journey. Okay, makes sense? I know I guided your hand a lot there and sort of pushed you towards that answer, but I'm glad that you got there. That makes total sense. I hope you see how to sort of approach this. Should we do action?
Yes.
All right. So we're going to have to re-envision the story now to involve, or to be action-specific, action-centered. So who do you think the right character would be in that version, and what changes would you make to the story in general?
Wow. If it being action, I would probably go with the default personality cat, because now it'll be more plot driven, won't it, than character driven?
It depends. It's up to you.
Oh.
So action means that there's going to be a lot of action scenes, right? And if the plot synopsis says she'll stop at nothing until cats get the representation in government, what does that tell you? How is the cat going to pursue her goals in this one?
Cat?
Right. So action. What happens in action movies?
Out of action?
Yeah, like violence, explosions, shootouts, car chases, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I get the sense that that's what the method that the cat is using to accomplish her goals in this version, right? Because it's an action movie.
Yes. Okay.
So now we're talking like a freedom fighter cat. So what kind of character would
Right.
would have a particularly difficult job being a sort of more of a guerrilla leader, or an ironic arc to his journey, or his or her journey as this kind of freedom fighter?
Oh wow. A oh, cat that likes to sit around and play video games, or
That's sort of the
uh,
incompetence thing that we want to avoid.
okay.
But then again,
A
if we
cat
start
that,
from the if there's some way that cat could be good at shooting and blowing stuff up, maybe you could say that cat learned how to do that from video games. I could see maybe some angle there, but we want to, for an action story, typically you have to have a, I mentioned before in the slideshow, you have to have a competent protagonist or else they would just die, right? Like they
right,
can't
exactly. Yeah, I
win
remember
at the
you saying
action
that,
scenes.
and I
But
totally liked
but there's a way, there might be a way to, like, we could say our cat does nothing but watch action movies all day long and so knows how to use guns. That'd be kind of cool. But so let's think of
okay.
let's go ahead if you have an idea.
In that case, a cat that um, is the total opposite of like freedom fighter personality, like not a, you won't see them on the picket line, like they're what's the word? They're probably
Pampered,
more
a
of
pampered
timid
cat. Oh, timid, yeah. Go on. Anything else?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say they're probably timid behind the scenes or whatever. And yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, I guess a pampered cat would not, would be more like. Yeah, I can't see Paris Hilton doing all of it. Yeah, a Paris Hilton cat, I guess.
Okay, great. I could see that. So yeah, if they were sort of timid and pampered, they had everything they wanted in life. They were given everything by humans, right? This would be the sort of cat who has a wake-up call, who maybe their human throws them out, or maybe like something, they end up getting thrown out because they try to defend another cat or something, or they see other cats getting abused outside the window every day, and they're always like, well, that's never going to happen to me, right? Until one day something bad happens that throws them out on the street and forces them to then become the spokesman for all the others so that he can try to get them the life that he always had, right? So I could definitely see that journey, a timid, pampered cat becoming this sort of guerrilla leader. That works.
Wow.
Shall we do romance?
Okay.
So what does a romance story need?
Two principals.
Yeah. So we need another character. So you're going to have to decide, is the cat falling in love with another cat, or is it something else? It's totally up to you.
Oh. I'll keep it two cats.
Okay.
so that
It's
I
just
can,
simplicity's sake.
wrap my head around it.
Okay, understood.
Oh, no, that's so great. That's a great idea. Yeah. So it'll be like a Romeo and Juliet sort of deal. So a cat and a dog falling in love.
Okay. So are the dogs on the side of the government?
Oh, that's right. It's the government.
You could do that. It could be a Secret Service dog. Or a military dog, right?
Right.
Because they don't have cats in those positions. Of course it would be dogs that were on the side of the government.
Exactly.
Okay, so help us. So let's pick. So for a romance, we have to kind of look at both characters' traits, right? It's like, she's a big city girl, he's a small town country bumpkin. How could they ever fall in love, right? So I guess you sort of have a little bit of that right now. We have I guess let's just determine, where does this version of the cat come from? So we're trying to have your character ultimately fall in love with the dog, and thereby, I imagine, we have to imagine that romance is going to also achieve their main goal of getting equal representation for cats. So who do you think the main character would be in this version?
Well, it would definitely. Well, okay. Well, it would definitely be the cat. It would have to be a cat that. Maybe it's a cat that is on a mission to get government representation for all the other cats, so they're like laser focused on this mission, and I don't need any sort of distractions, feline or canine or anything else. Like all that stuff gets in the way
Hmm.
of achieving these goals. So that kind of cat, like a
But you've chosen enemies to lovers, right? So how do we get your characters in a situation where they could fall in love is the question that we would ask. And that might change your choices a little bit, right? I can see the version that you're suggesting, the strong independent woman who don't need no man sort of thing, in which case you would think if she was even more driven in her cause, she'd be even less likely to fall in love with a dog who's the enemy. So if we're doing enemies to lovers, you might have to change the scenario a little bit so maybe they get stuck together or they get trapped together or something like that, like they end up on a boat together, you see what I mean, so that they have to kind of work together and fall in love. Any ideas there?
okay, yeah. Okay, so yeah. Um, she will get thrown into a situation since she's trying, she's trying to get into government anyway,
Hmm.
and the dog is government dog. Like they're gonna have to cross paths and like not just cross paths, but they're like working like against each other on this whole thing.
Yeah.
And then the
Might be
the
easier. Oh,
dog.
go ahead.
Oh no, go for it.
I was just going to say this might be easier if you have your main character doing sort of an infiltration, saying or maybe perhaps even being a prisoner, like being imprisoned by the government in this version. Because maybe the first protest goes too far, the cat gets locked up, and the dog is the guard at the jail, or something like that. That would be a sort of we can fall in love that way, right? You just need to have a scenario where it makes sense that your characters could be in close proximity, but not at each other's throats.
Okay.
So we might have to ask, who's a version of this character that would most likely get thrown in jail pretty early on in the story? So we might say something like, an extremist cat, a cat that thinks, nothing I do is too far to get us the right to vote. And those ideologies are going to clash with the dogs while they're in the jail, and they're going to come to some kind of understanding.
All bureaucracy and all.
Yeah.
Right.
So any other we can end this one if you want, but I hope this made sense. Did you have any other ideas for any of these scenarios that you wanted to share?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
I'm gonna flush it out.
It's tough, right? It's on the spot. It's especially difficult to kind of just because you have to do a couple things. You have to think of how would the story be different and conceptualize the new hook and the new version of the story, and then ask who would be the best character to go in there, because those things might change each other. Like the more you change of one, the more it might change of the other one. So I'm sorry if I was like cutting you off a little bit or like trying to be a little rigorous in keeping on track. You had really good ideas. So again, thank you for volunteering and sharing.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Joya. All right, let's get our next volunteer. I think Pollock raised his hand. If he's still here, he can raise it again. There he is. So we'll do Pollock, and Joel volunteered next. We'll get Joel in the next one. All right, next one is going to be the Castle Treasurer. Come on up, Pollock. You were doing a medieval pilot, aren't you?
Yeah.
All right, so this is a medieval story. This is going to be a story about... Why don't you read the scenario for us?
All right. Ooh, a castle treasurer must defend his vault from thieves until the king returns.
Yeah, all right.
Interesting.
So you can pick either the thieves or the treasurer as your main character in any of these different versions. So you can use whatever pieces of this you want. You can change whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a king.
I already have one.
Oh, you already have an idea. Great. Okay. Who do you think the main character would be here?
A greedy treasurer.
Okay, he's greedy. So greedy in the sense that he is kind of corrupt, do you think? Like, is he sort of embezzling money from his own vault? Or is he... Oh, you think so? Okay. So he's sort of a thief himself.
Yes.
Interesting. That would be. I agree. Okay, so in the version...
Thieves would
Go
be
ahead.
like a Robin Hood type of thieves.
Oh, okay, so they're sort of heroic thieves.
Yeah.
Okay, this is great. Okay, so your main character in that case, or protagonist, might be one of the thieves, and this is sort of like the villain. Or it might be that this is a villain protagonist story. Which one do you think you would want to see more?
I think a villain protagonist story. We very rarely get those.
Yeah, I love them, especially in historicals. That'd be cool. Okay, so let's sort of an evil castle treasurer, or at least a very corrupt one, is going to be the character we follow as he tries to defend his vault from these Robin Hood type characters who are trying to help the poor of the kingdom while the king is gone. They only have one chance to do it, and we're going to watch your main character probably do worse and worse stuff, because in a villain protagonist movie, usually it's nice to have a negative arc. Unless you were thinking, did you want to see this guy redeemed by the end or no?
Well, he could be redeemed by the end, but I don't know. Too many villain movies have redemptions, so I probably might not have them.
Sure, just have him double down. Just get worse and worse. It's fine.
Yeah, just get worse.
That'd be cool. So he's doing more extreme things. He's setting up traps. He's hiring more and more crazy guards and like the most corrupt enforcers he can possibly hire. It's just getting tougher and tougher for these thieves. I could see that really working. I think that's a cool take on the story. Let's shift it. Let's do horror comedy.
Horror comedy.
You don't have to keep any of the stuff you had from the last one. You can make either one of them the protagonist or change anything you want. Go ahead.
The best thing I can think of is a young treasurer who's new at his job has to team up with thieves when the gold of the vault comes to life and tries to kill them.
Okay, so it sort of becomes haunted or possessed. The treasure itself becomes cursed, and now he needs to work with the thieves, and they're not trying to defend the vault. I guess they're trying to defend the castle from being destroyed at this point more than the money itself, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe they're trying to get as much money as they can back from the kind of gold elementals. So they'll have to defeat... This sounds like a video game, doesn't it? Where it's like every gold elemental you beat, you get the coins. That's kind of cool. I like that take.
And the protagonist is a young treasurer, and he's new at his job, and he wants to... And at first, the story would be like him defending the vault, but then he realizes that it's haunted, and the gold monsters try to kill the thieves, and then he teams up with the thieves to destroy the gold monsters.
Yeah, maybe even at first he's like, why do people keep trying to break into the vault? It turns out they're just like cursed relic hunters. They're like, you have a curse in there, we have to get it out. And he's like, get out of here, you stupid thieves and your lies. And then it turns out, no, they were right. They were actually, there is actually a curse in it. It's almost like Prince of Persia a little bit, like it threatens to destroy the whole kingdom. Sounds cool. Nice choice. Let's do one more. Erotic thriller. That's right. You heard me. So we have to have a central... It's like romance, right? Central relationship. But in an erotic thriller, the person that you are getting in this relationship with is usually dangerous in some way. So you might have to add another character.
Well...
Or it could be a romance between a thief and the treasure, or something like that, if you don't want to add a character. Up to you.
I'm just going to go with romance between the thief and the treasurer.
Okay, so who's our main character?
Let's see. I already did the treasurer, so let's go with thief.
Okay, so a thief is the main character, and so kind of tell us a little bit about the main character and how they would fit into this version of the story, like that you're saying there. Go ahead.
I was thinking a woman at this point.
Okay.
It's an erotic thriller.
Okay.
What type of woman?
So is she sort of seducing the treasurer in order to get into the castle? Is it like it sort of starts as like a ploy? Is that what you're thinking, or?
No, I think it would be funnier if the treasurer seduces her.
Okay.
To try to get her to rob the vault.
Okay.
And I could see like an erotic thriller just playing around with that.
Okay, so where's the conflict coming in? So you're saying that he's sort of seducing her. She's like a famous thief or maybe she is like a well-known thief. Like he knows that she's going to rob this place, and starts kind of getting closer to her in order to encourage her to maybe help him instead of maybe get her to turn on her companions, something like that. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Okay, anything else? Feel free to riff on that or explain anything else you want.
Well, so I'm still wrapping my head around the erotic part.
Well, that means that, so they have sex a lot, usually in erotic thrillers, but also beyond that, and I've done rewrites on erotic thrillers, it's like the closer you get to this relationship, the more danger you get in, is kind of at the heart of it. And I like that you've chosen enemies here, so, or like on its face they would be enemies, so it makes sense. Go ahead.
Well, we could have cursed gold.
Sure.
Cursed gold. We can literally include the cursed gold of the original horror comedy, but the cursed gold doesn't kill them. It sort of enhances certain traits.
Okay. This sounds a little more like a comedy. Or a porno.
Yeah, it is a comedy.
I guess this is just a porno, not an erotic thriller. There is a difference. Anyway.
Oh, there's a difference?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry,
So,
I forgot the thriller part.
Yeah, the thriller part. Yeah, this would be like, Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct. Okay, so in any case, I see the basics of what you mean. The fact that they are enemies does allow this to be an erotic thriller, and sort of like, especially if he's offering something to her, he's like, the closer you get to me, the more that we fall in love. I'm going to sort of draw you away from your old lifestyle and the people that you used to be close to, which is going to maybe put a rift between her and her old guild.
Yes.
All right, that makes sense.
In the end, she either turned on the guild or she doesn't. I don't know, actually.
I guess somebody will just have to write it to find out. Thank you for participating, Pollock. Great answers.
Thank you.
All right, hopefully you guys all see what we're doing here. And our next, we have a couple more flip the script exercises, which will start with a story that we know. So I just want to show you the list of movies that we will be working from, and so when you volunteer, you can pick which one of them you want to modify. So I would pick one that you kind of know it a little bit, even if you don't, though, just, a genre that you're a little bit familiar with might be helpful, but we'll be turning it on its head, so be ready for that. So the list of movies: we have Room 2015, Best Picture nominee drama. We have Ratatouille 2007, animated comedy. Halloween 1978, horror slasher. Independence Day 96, sci-fi. San Andreas 2015, disaster, and Lake Placid 1999, horror creature feature. So those are the choices, and when you volunteer, you choose which one you want to play with. All right, we had Joel volunteer next, I think. Joel, do you still want to volunteer? Hello.
Here's my microphone going. Sorry, my microphone's very temperamental today.
No problem. I hear you fine.
Cool.
Which movie do you want to pick?
So, San Andreas is the only one I've actually seen somehow, so I'm gonna take that.
Okay, let's go to. You haven't seen.
Oh, I've seen Ratatouille, but yeah.
All right, so San Andreas, maybe not the best movie ever made, perhaps, but the setup gives us a pretty simple scenario to start with. In the aftermath of, well, why don't you read the scenario?
In the aftermath of a massive earthquake in California, a rescue chopper pilot makes a dangerous journey with his ex-wife across the state in order to rescue his daughter.
Right.
Go ahead. Okay. Give the hero a new really dark goal that makes us root against him or her. In other words, alter this premise until we have a great villain protagonist.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking with this, and you can take a little time to think about it and talk it out, but I just want to say I picked this specifically because in this movie we have a character who's a rescue pilot trying to save people from a disaster. It's not like we need to even give him like super vital, urgent motivation, but the movie does. He's not only is he a rescue pilot trying to save people, he's trying to save his own daughter, who's in the disaster zone. Alongside, the central relationship is with his ex-wife, and don't you know it, by the end they heal their bond and they end up together again, and I think whenever they do this, usually the other guy dies horribly in these movies. They did that in 2012, and it's very kind of like weirdly, they're actually weirdly fine with it. They're like, well, we fixed our relationship, it's okay, that guy died. Anyway, so that's the journey normally. We have a character doing this for a really good reason, going to save his own family in the disaster zone. So your challenge is to make a villain protagonist here. So you can change his goal. You can say he's going to kill somebody rather than help them, or something like that. Just maybe think of rescue pilot going into earthquake scenario. Make us root against him, but in an interesting way. What have you got?
So I'm thinking that actually this girl isn't the daughter, but is a kidnap victim, and he basically is the one who ordered the kidnapping, and he was like going to leave her, like it's a ransom sort of thing, and he was just going to leave her and let his goons deal with it. And then there's this earthquake, and now he has to make sure that the girl is safe so that he can get paid.
All right. That is nice angle on that. So in this case, it is sort of ironic. We do have that kind of ironic journey of the guy who's rushing to the rescue is actually the kidnapper, but he is trying to save the life of the girl he kidnapped. So he's going to swoop in his helicopter and be like, I'm here to save you. And she's like, oh my God, I'm saved. Oh, crap, it's you, right? Like, so that's going to be kind of an interesting dynamic there. I think we could definitely root against a character like that. Anything else you think that you would have to change about this to make us, like, really root against this character? Any other aspects of this character that you'd want to throw out there? So do you want to keep him as a chopper pilot?
No, because you have to be talented to do that. So I guess he's just like a crime boss or something. And so like he like a mafia or something, I don't know. And so he owns a helicopter and stuff. So he's really rich, but has got that wealth through, crime and whatever.
Okay. So in this case, it might help us to start with the main character that everyone assumes is a really good guy, right? So if he's a mob boss that has a really good cover of some kind, people think he's a philanthropist, because the irony of this premise is he's going on a rescue mission into an earthquake zone, which is a dangerous, brave thing to do, but in order to do a bad thing in a way, right? Or in order to rescue somebody from the bad situation he's put them in. So if we start with a main character that people assume is really good, or everybody thinks he is really good, then we'll be seeing a sort of interested other side of him, right?
Yeah.
So who do you think might fit that mold?
Sorry, what do you mean by that? Sorry.
So who's a character that everybody thinks very highly of, that nobody would suspect is actually a kidnapper?
Oh, so yeah, a rich person.
A rich what?
I mean, just go on.
So I guess I would ask: is he like does he run a charity? Like, I'm trying to get more specific a little bit. So is he like a war hero? Like a rich person who most people wouldn't assume a rich person is a good person. I would think,
no,
right?
That's true.
So who's a rich person we would assume is a good person?
I don't know, like someone high up in the police or something.
Oh, okay, sure. Maybe like a chief of police, or like a highly respected detective who normally is freeing people from captivity. So he's sort of doing literally the opposite. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm not sure if a detective would be really wealthy or something like that unless they had a big kind of tell-all book or something like that. Maybe that you could go that angle with it, where like he's sort of the subject of a lot of true crime books or something. People think he's a hero.
Or maybe he's like a journalist or like a news, because if you get really senior, you can get paid a lot of money for that.
Sure. So you think like an investigative reporter kind of thing?
Yeah, and that would get him the cover for a helicopter or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
So he's going in. He's got his like helicopter crew and his camera guy, but he's like, all right, halfway there, he's like, okay, guys, you're gonna have to drop me off alone to do something real quick. He's gonna have to go. He's gonna let me just go take a few pictures real quick, and then he's gonna go rescue her and try to put her in the helicopter and take her to safety. It'll be interesting to have those other people there that he can't reveal the truth to. He's gonna have her like bound and gagged and stuff, right? I like that. That's a good angle, Joel. The sort of heroic journalist that nobody actually and maybe it could be an interesting second act break where we actually realize what he's really doing, right? It could be kind of a big twist in a story like this where we realize, wait a minute, what's he actually up to? Because it's definitely not going to take pictures. Any other ideas here?
I'm wondering whether I can fit in the ex-wife in any way.
Up to you. I mean, we could always bring the ex-wife because she owns the helicopter, and then maybe do something with that. She's the one piloting it or something.
She's a camera person, maybe.
Oh, she's the camera person.
Maybe, yeah.
And then she's gonna maybe threaten to expose him. Go ahead.
She sort of has an idea of how bad he is, but underestimates how bad he is. So when he asks to get dropped off, she's suspicious and has a bad feeling, but doesn't really know what's going on.
Maybe she's following him, stalking him through the disaster zone, trying to prove who he really is.
I mean, I wasn't even going that. I was going to make her a very minor character.
Oh, sure.
And make her sort of just stay in the helicopter. But it's when he comes back into the helicopter with this one girl who he's quote unquote rescued, that she's like, why this girl? And she's questioning it.
Sure.
That's what I was going down.
Yeah, that could work too. And then it's going to become a sort of tense struggle between the three of them in the helicopter. Could be a good thriller.
Yeah.
I like this better than the real movie, at least.
One of them gets pushed out just for the drama.
Of course, yeah. Or maybe pushed out while you have the harness attached to you, so you end up hanging over the ground as the helicopter swoops over the tidal wave. You gotta have that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joel. There's some good ideas.
Thank you.
We've got about 20 minutes. We have a couple more. So let me ask more volunteers. Pollock's raising his hand. Pollock already did an earlier one. So let's see if we have any new volunteers first. Dan says, I'll go. Coming up, Dan. Hey, Dan, which movie do you want to pick from this list?
Wait, is that like The Room?
No, this
the
is...
The meme one?
No. This is the drama Room from 2015 with Brie Larson.
Oh. Independence Day, then.
Okay. I think you'll like this one. So, go ahead and read the premise and the twist.
Independence Day, 1996. Original story. In the aftermath of a worldwide attack by a powerful extraterrestrial race, the U.S. president must organize a counterattack to save Earth. Twist. Make an alien the protagonist and make us really root for him. She doesn't have to be an alien leader. Could have any goal.
All right, so we have the same setup. There is an alien invasion of Earth going. The president's going to try to save Earth. But now an alien needs to be the hero. You can make up a new goal for him or her. It doesn't have to be to save the Earth. It can be something else. But we really need to root for the character. So feel free to brainstorm. What do you think?
Well, the alien species is dying out. Their home planet, which is very similar in its makeup and design to Earth, is, well, something happened. Is it nuclear war? Is it destruction? Is it a comet? Whatever it is, these people need to find. These people are nomads among the stars, and they need a new place to live, desperately. Of course, the Earthlings are incredibly. Whatever the planetary version of xenophobic is. So they're not exactly letting these people come in to settle. So now their only hope is to use their limited advanced technology to get to fight for their lives.
Okay, so who's our main character?
So they've got to land soon, and they got to restock on sources of fuel and air.
Okay. So who's the protagonist?
The protagonist is a young alien, I guess, a young alien soldier. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, the Independence Day, was the president really the protagonist?
Pretty much. I mean, I guess Will Smith's
There were a
character...
bunch of characters you could look at and say, these were kind of protagonists, too.
I mean, Will Smith's character would be
Will
it's
Smith,
sort of
for
a,
instance,
yeah, it's sort of a
felt more
two-hander.
protagonist than me because he kind of had more to actually had to do more suffering.
Right. So I can't exactly remember who gets more screen time, if it's the president or Will Smith, but it might be a two-hander between the two of them. Or
It
something
could
like
just
that.
be where Will Smith has like a charisma score of 50, and so he kind of just dwarfed everyone.
That might be. You're right.
I don't know.
So let's choose our protagonist carefully, though, right? So you've given us a scenario where you're just basically saying, yes, the aliens are invading Earth, but they need to for their own survival. So that's okay. I'm still ultimately going to side with the people just because I'm a person, though, right? So you're going to have to choose this character carefully so that we really root for him as opposed to the human characters, right? So why are we rooting for the soldier?
Well, because he's a father with a very sick child who needs pure water and needs to get onto the surface to get that child some water to drink because it's dying.
Okay, so you mean like back up on the ship, the alien has a kid that he's trying to provide for? Okay, I could see that, and so as we're watching him murder humans and attempt to invade the Earth, you're saying we're going to keep rooting for him because even though does he know it's does he think it's wrong?
Child who just needs to get outside to get some fresh air and some healthy and some water, but the hostile environment will kill it. It's an innocent creature. After all.
Okay, so you're saying that...
And any attempt to try and go down is met with missiles. So there's no recourse but to fight. The shields won't hold forever.
So are you saying that the alien is against killing the humans, or that he is fine with it?
I'm not saying they're fine with it. I'm saying if you don't fire back, they're just going to keep firing at you.
So is he a reluctant soldier, would you say?
I would say so.
Okay.
I would say most of the aliens are in this situation.
Sure. Okay. So we might, in this log line, we don't have to make a good log line for it, but it might be something like, when a reluctant alien invader is forced for his survival, right, to head down to Earth and to raid and pillage, then I could start to see rooting for this character. If he doesn't want to do it, he knows it's wrong. It's like a tragedy. You pitched a sort of a tragic approach to the story, right, where both factions don't want the war to be happening. It's like an atrocity that it is happening, but they're going to die if they don't do it. So it's like only if it's you or me, then the aliens are the ones that are saying that we're the ones that want to survive. Is that right?
Pretty much.
Okay, so the reason this works fine as a story, I like this and would like to see this. The reason we don't see this a lot is because it's just hard to. It's just sad, right? Like Independence Day sort of works as an action sci-fi movie. This is no comment on your pitch, but I just want to say Independence Day and movies like this really work because we have a villain we can really root against, right? The aliens in Independence Day, what is their motivation that they say when they end up possessing a guy?
I think they just wanted to conquer. I don't remember their exact one-liner.
Yeah,
the one word. One alien, because we only see one alien ever. The rest is just like big spaceships and ships.
Yeah, so there's a part where they take over that guy's brain and the president is like, what do you want from us? What do you want us to do? And they just like, die, right? Easy to root against that. Very easy to root against somebody who
I
just
do
wants
remember
us
that in that movie, though, they specifically wanted to be on Earth because we had a very comparable atmospheric conditions.
Yeah,
planetary conditions.
I think they did want Earth, but ultimately they sort of sadistically wanted to kill us. Like it wasn't sad for them that they had to kill us. They wanted to kill us.
Right.
So in your version, you're sort of saying it's a much sadder take on this where the aliens are like, I'm sorry, but here's how it has to be. It's an interesting, area to explore. I don't really think we've seen that before, so it's a unique take. I think some audience members it's very challenging, right? Because it's sort of asking the audience members to continue rooting for the alien all throughout the story, even as, I assume, the costs are mounting up. The casualties on both sides are piling up higher and higher. And ultimately, this feels like it might have kind of a sad ending. This feels like an anti-war story. Is that how you see it?
Seems to be the theme of a lot of my stories lately.
Well, when you have an action story where both sides are sort of in the right, and therefore it's only sad that they're fighting, that sort of just ends up building the dramatic argument of war is bad, right?
I'm okay with that.
It's true. War is, in fact, bad. So, makes sense. Thanks, Dan. I think that the reluctant alien soldier is a fascinating protagonist to explore.
I will look into that more.
Go ahead. Yeah, if somebody wants to write any of these, you have full permission to do so. And that's why it's nice to start. If you even if you start with something familiar, it's not. It doesn't. You don't have to write a fan fiction. We can just use this as like a jumping off point to write our own original idea. Thank you very much, Dan. I'm gonna throw you back in the audience, sploosh, because we have time for probably one more. Looks like we got a request from notfbi.exe. Come on up. Hello, NotFBI.
Hello, I'm NotFBI.
I'm suspicious of that, but that's okay. Let's check our list, and why don't you pick a movie from the list?
I've seen is Ratatouille. I mean, out of the things that we've done.
Okay, want to do Ratatouille? Here we go. Can you read this premise and the twist?
Oh, Ratatouille. A Parisian rat teams up with a no-talent wannabe chef to battle convention and the critics, proving that anyone could cook.
And the twist?
We take a different POV than the rat and make it a horror story.
Make it a horror story. Yeah. So we can't be from the rat's POV, and it doesn't have to be a rat in your version, and it should, I guess it should still be either a rat or a chef. Like, let's try to keep it basically intact. But you can change what you want. It doesn't have to be Paris. And just take a few seconds, talk it out, think it out. What are you thinking? Horror story version of Ratatouille. A little creature controlling your brain is a little scary, right?
Yeah. So I have two ways I could go. In a perspective of a critic who's a germaphobe, and in a way he sees the rat making the food and he gets scared because it's dirty and that he might get diseases. Another way is that the rat, instead of he's a cook, like Ratatouille Part 2 maybe, but this time he goes into the business of making poisons and designer poisons to kill people of Paris.
Okay.
Or food critics who are rude. So, I mean, it's a common trope that food critics are rude. So, he teams up with a few people, I guess, or maybe forced to go into a line where he's making designer drugs to poison famous people at famous restaurants and, just high-class people.
So is he specifically killing the critics who maybe gave him bad reviews or something like that?
Not that way, but someone might figure it out, and they could use Ratatouille to for their own gain, and maybe killing their parents or someone who's holding out their inheritance, a rich spoiled kid who uses Ratatouille, and Ratatouille has to come out from behind it, and he might not actually necessarily kill the food critic, maybe, but it was like a heat of the moment decision where he gets angry and he decides to make a poison and accidentally comes out that he made poison. And then to make more.
Okay, so who's our main character in this
Now
room?
he has to find a way.
So you said our main character is a critic, right?
No, the rat.
No,
we have to pick
a different POV than the rat.
Okay, all right. Yeah, a critic who uses the rat, and we could use that POV to kind of show how rats are not supposed to be cooks, and build on that throughout the film. Maybe change the perspective throughout, like how they view the rat at the start and how they view the rat at the end.
Okay, so let's describe our main characters. Remember all the different questions we ask. Who would have a particularly difficult journey in this? Who would have a particularly ironic journey? Maybe, do you want to look at that list of questions, or do you have some ideas how you can flesh out the main character a little bit?
Give me a second.
Sure. First of all, I think your main character just needs a clear goal. So it might be expose the poisoning rat before he kills all of us critics, right? That might be his goal, just expose the rat.
Yeah.
Or stop him, or kill him. Something like that.
Okay. character could be a restaurant manager of like a failing restaurant.
Okay.
He feels like thought about the rat at some point. I guess according to his necessities, it changes. Like at first, he was reluctant and like downright mean to the rat, I guess, about using the rat. And then when the circumstances change, where his restaurant is going to get closed down, and that he doesn't have enough resources to keep it up, he's forced to use the rat in this situation.
He's forced. This doesn't sound like a horror story anymore.
Okay.
Unless you're saying that our main character, the critic, starts poisoning people with the rat, and they both sort of become like a team of villains that we're kind of rooting for. Is that what you're saying? Or remember, a horror story has as high stakes as possible, life and death. It means that our main character needs to be in as much danger as we can possibly put them in. It also means we're going to have scare sequences, death sequences, and we're going to be amplifying that danger all throughout the story until we get to this final showdown between the hero and the villain.
We could have it as, him starting it out as just using the poison to keep his restaurant open, but then he figures out that he can actually profit from it, and then he actually likes doing it, and then we can build on that more as it keeps amplifying throughout the story.
How does using poison keep your restaurant open? By killing the critics that would tear it down?
More people would, be curious about the situation, then he would kill them, and then more people, and he would kill them as well. It would just keep building and building.
That seems like the opposite of his goal. So it seems like he would maybe be using the poison to either kill the competition or to kill the critics that were threatening to give him bad reviews, right? Isn't it one of those, or do you have a different idea?
We don't.
You don't. That's okay. So if you're sort of saying, so our main character we're doing a villain protagonist now, where he teams up with Remy. Not his name is Remy, right? And then Remy sort of starts steering him, making him into a great poison smith, so that he can, save his business from these evil critics that are going to, critics that he sees as evil, who are going to take his restaurant down. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay. So let's ask, who would be the person, let's just choose some traits for this character or a background for this character. Who do you think would have a particularly difficult or ironic time doing this, I guess? I can give you suggestions if you want.
Something he doesn't want. Sure, yeah.
You want suggestions? So think of the character's background, right? Was he previously like a 5-star chef that, because of critic reviews, has gotten knocked down to 1 star? Or something along those lines, where, like, you see, like, think of who he used to be and what the situation is going to force him to do to change, to try to regain that status he used to have. Maybe you could go that kind of route. Or maybe he used to be a critic himself, or something like that. We're looking for connections with the antagonist and with the central relationship to sort of juice up the story.
Okay. So I'm not sure about this, but how about that he was a great chef, but he has Parkinson's, so his hand started to tremble. But with Remy controlling him, his hand does not tremble anymore. So he forms an unhealthy obsession with it.
This is really good. So he has a muscular or a degenerative condition that makes his hands shake, so he was forced to stop being a chef. And now that you're saying this opportunity, teaming up with Remy, is going to give him a new lease on life. So why is he going to kill people rather than just become a great chef again?
Because it might not entirely be in his control, because with his unhealthy obsession, the rat has most of the control of him now, and then he can't do basic everyday activities, and now he has to rely on Remy to do it for him.
Okay, so maybe it's Remy that's killing people. Maybe maybe he doesn't even want to be killing people, but Remy's forcing him to. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay, I like this. I'm starting to see this now. It's a little bit like the original movie in that case. So we're back to sort of like a Linguini type character, and the rat is going to make him a really good chef, but the rat is a psychopath and wants to kill people, maybe as revenge for all the times that people have poisoned the rats of the world, right? So our main character is going to become a serial killer inadvertently because Remy's controlling him. Make sense? Do you like that one? I would watch that. Rakakuni, no! All right. Thank you so much for volunteering for this one. We're down to our last 5 minutes, so I'm probably just going to open to questions from anyone. But appreciate all of our volunteers from today. Hopefully you guys had fun with this. I know it's tough, especially with me staring at you, forcing you to make better choices. But I hope that you're at least sort of seeing the ways that we are adapting characters, or like matching characters to situations, and how we should always be very rigorous about choosing the right character, the person that's going to have the most interesting possible journey, just so that we are assembling the most entertaining kind of ground level, base level version of the movie before we even get any further into the design of it. That's almost always going to come down to who is the person that needs to go on this journey. Why is it going to be tough for them? Why is it going to be particularly interesting that they are the one to go on it? All right, so let me open to questions on anything we've talked about today for our last 5 minutes. What would you guys like to know or hear about? I'll just leave this upcoming free classes up behind me. Is this a question for me from Pollock? What if they have a relatively simple goal? Is that a question? It's fine for a character to have a simple... Oh, you're just asking how do you design a protagonist with a really simple goal? Yeah, no, a lot of the best stories do have protagonists that have very simple goals, or goals that can be boiled down in a very simple way. It's very helpful for the story if they do have that. So that's what we're talking about, I guess. That's like designing a protagonist is often going to be finding a person that has that relatively simple goal. It's kind of our objective. Other questions? Or feel free to follow up on that if I didn't answer something you were thinking of. Let me move out of the way so you can see all the upcoming classes. Thank you for that, Nacho. He's left in the chat. You can a link to our upcoming feature screenwriting class Sunday, April 30th at 11 a.m. in just 4 days. Our new class starts course starts. That will be idea to finish draft in 8 weeks. You can click interested on that little bell icon there, and you'll be notified before the class starts. All right, here's a question from Heated123. Films that kill their protagonist halfway through the film. It was the antagonist's film all along. Well, this is really, really rare, what you're suggesting. Killing the protagonist halfway through almost never happens. There's like hardly any... I mean, feel free to list some examples of that if you can think of any. But movies that are going to kill their protagonist usually do so towards the end. I mean, in almost every case. The only other... I'm thinking of maybe Psycho would be one that kills its protagonist halfway through. Spoilers for Psycho from the 60s if you haven't seen that. In that case, yeah, you're right. The fun and the hook of Psycho is that sort of twist of figuring out, wait, whose story is this really? What's really going on here? And at the end of the day, it is Norman Bates' story. He is sort of the protagonist that we don't meet until the break into 2 of Psycho, and then the second half of the movie is him essentially trying to get away with the crime until he gets busted and caught at the very end. So I think that you can do that, but it should only be... You have to set it up really carefully, and it's going to be... Yeah, ultimately, you're right. It would be sort of... It would end up being probably the antagonist or a side character's story to begin with, and the fact that we only realize that halfway through is part of the sort of twisty nature of that movie. Really tough to pull it off. Joya has asked for slides on this topic. I'll share those right now. There you go. Any last questions in our last 2 minutes? There's, again, that poll in the chat. If you intend to sign up or you've enjoyed this class today, feel free to vote in number 1 or number 2 if you're thinking of signing up for feature or TV class. And we can get you into our member-exclusive chat channels and answer any remaining questions that you guys have. I'll leave the floor open for just 2 more minutes if somebody would like to raise their hand and speak and ask something or ask a question in the text. Question from Pollock. How will this work if you're struggling with the premise or plot? Well, this is an important and intrinsic part of premise and plot. So normally we come up with the situation first, or in high concept screenwriting, normally we start with that situation. And until you have the situation, you're not ready to come up with a character for it, I would say. There are the occasional writer that will start with a character and then derive a situation from that. That can work in certain genres and with certain types of writers. It's possible. But normally we're going to have the situation first and then use that kind of story math to ask the questions to find the person to go through that. And once you have done both of those things, situation and character, then you have a premise. That's what a premise is. A premise is character, a hook, and a journey. So until you have those three things, I would say you are definitely struggling with the premise. And this is sort of like an essential last part of the premise. It's like once we have the situation down, you don't have a premise fully intact yet until you have that perfect character to go through it. Any last questions? Feel free to unmute or raise a hand, and I'll call on you if you'd like. And seems like no questions, so we will wrap up here. Thank you guys so much for coming, and everyone who volunteered. Great job with the participants, thinking on your feet, answering those story logic problems. We have plenty of upcoming classes coming up here, as you can see. In 2 days, we have that pilot boot camp week 1 on Friday from 6 to 8 Pacific time. After that, we have Sunday, April 30th, intro to our feature writing class where you'll write a movie in 8 weeks. These are both free and public classes, and we hope to see you guys there. Have a great rest of your night, folks.